Oh, okay. Oh, great. Okay, cool. Well, hi, Chris's audience as well. Yeah, so we kind of have a bit of a broad theme. Tomorrow we've got a live stream coming out with another friend of the channel, James Kerr-Lindsay, but that's more of a diplomatic discussion about the UN and sort of what's been happening. But as a place to start, really, I mean, as we live stream this, Chris, we've got Bibi Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, giving his address to the General Assembly. And obviously, this is all in the context of what I thought we were going to mainly talk about, although who knows where the conversation goes in the next, 30, 40 minutes, is the Israeli-Hezbollah situation. Like, it's insane what we're seeing at the moment. I've never seen tension like it. What's your, I'd love your immediate reactions on that.
There's an argument to be made that right now Israel's working on basically the shaping operations to set the conditions for a ground invasion. And we talked about this last time a little bit. I think it got cut off, but the way I look at what's happening in Israel right now is I compare it. Just the best way to understand what's happening, I think, is to compare it to what happened in 2006. So in 2006, when Israel last time they went and did a ground assault into Lebanon, what we saw was they committed about 15,000 ground troops. And so this time around, what I would expect to see as a precondition would be Israeli IDF forces, tanks massing on the border with Lebanon. And currently that is what we're seeing. There's news now that more and more ground forces are massing. And so that, to me, it's an indicator. It's not a guarantee, but it's an indicator that it's moving in the direction of probably the first ground assault into Lebanon since 2006. From the Israeli point of view, they did this whole, commission afterwards where they researched what happened in the 2006 Lebanon war. And they determined, the Israeli, from their perspective, they determined that it was not very successful, that it didn't go the way they wanted it to go. They believe that they relied too much on air power instead of ground assaults. So they did small battalion company sized raids into Lebanon, but they never really committed 100,000 troops that they would have needed to push Hezbollah back to I think it's called the Litani River. I might have pronounced that wrong, but there's a river in Lebanon, Litani River. Yeah, the Litani River, I believe, is the one where the IDF wants basically to create a buffer zone and to push Hezbollah forces back to that river. Now, something that's interesting is there's actually a peacekeeping force made up largely of Americans that are in that area right now, and their whole job is supposed to be to prevent war and to stop that from happening. But they haven't been successful. They haven't been successful in keeping Hezbollah out of there, which was part of the agreement to end the war in 2006, was that Hezbollah would not be located in that buffer zone there. That was the agreement to end that war, but that has not been kept since then. You could argue, some people argue, that the 2006 war was somewhat of a success from Israel's point of view because it did stop further rocket attacks into northern Israel for the next 10, 20 years. But on a tactical level, they didn't achieve a lot of the goals they wanted to. So that, I think, is what we're seeing now would be round two, sort of that kind of still unresolved conflict on the northern border. And the terrain in northern Israel and southern Lebanon, there where the fighting would happen, that terrain is very different than what they would be facing in Gaza, for instance. Now, urban combat is very difficult and dangerous, but this offers a different kind of danger because we're looking at very hilly, high elevations, rocky terrain. There's a lot of brush. There's a lot of places basically for Hezbollah to launch different ambushes.
Yeah.
And we saw that in 2006, and we expect that to only be worse going forward in this, if there's a second ground assault. So that's why Israel's taking some of these steps up beforehand, like the attack with the beepers to take out some of their leadership, like these airstrikes to further degrade their command and control abilities, because Israel knows that they're going to be basically walking into a hornet's nest here, and that Hezbollah is more prepared. They believe that the numbers of Hezbollah fighters are not what was once projected. People believe there was 100,000 fighters. Now they're estimating that maybe it's closer to 30,000. But that's still, if we're talking about a ratio of you want 3 attackers to every 1 defender, we would expect to see Israel want to deploy something like 60, 70,000, closer to like 100,000 ground troops to push Hezbollah back to, you see right there, the Litani River.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazing at pronunciations, apparently. I've been told I'm
You're
just
very on point with that. Yeah. No, for sure. But I think just to chime in on that, because I think for people, they need to keep in mind the size of Lebanon. It's not a massive country, right? The whole population is pretty small. So from what I understand, Hezbollah is predominantly popular in the south, or controls more of the south and the east. You've obviously got different ethnic groups within Lebanon, but the Shia Muslims are the ones, about 4% support Hezbollah, being very, very crude and breakdown there, versus the Christians and the Sunnis, which don't tend to support them as much. Of course, this depends on context and the situation. I don't think the Lebanese are exactly thrilled with 700 of their people being killed by the developments this week, and it's the worst, I believe, in Lebanon's history. At least that's one piece of analysis I read. But it's great. I like talking to you because I feel like I can, chime in with some of the bigger picture stuff, but then you really break down more of that tactical operational side as well. But so from the research that you've done, what exactly are you seeing in the form of Hezbollah's capabilities? They don't really have an air force. They don't really have a navy, so to speak. Maybe they have some assets. I'm not entirely sure.
Something that a lot of people don't, it's that I find fascinating, that a lot of people don't know about in Lebanon, is that they kind of have 2 armies. So Lebanon, the government, has an army themselves, and that army is very much supported by the United States. They're equipped with M4s, they're equipped with M113s. They were, up until like 10 years ago, they were not really a serious fighting force, but over the last decade or so, they have become more well equipped and well trained, and they've basically sharpened their teeth in fighting various extremist groups that were threatening them from Syria. So the Lebanese army itself is separate from the Hezbollah fighting force, but there's still a belief that the Hezbollah fighting force is stronger than the Lebanese army itself. So it would be like if there was a separate sorry, is my audio messed up, or is it all right?
No, you're perfectly fine.
Okay.
I mean, anyone, if there's that's perfectly fine. There is some. I'm using headphones this time around because there's construction.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm using headphones, but
sorry. The Hezbollah fighting force is considered to be more strong than the actual army. It'd be like if there was some militia force in the United States that was more powerful than the U.S. Army. So, and then there's also the peacekeeping troops in there. So Hezbollah itself has gotten a lot stronger because what they've done over the last 10 years is they have also gone into Syria and they've learned how to do mechanized assaults. They've commanded some tank units in Syria. There's Hezbollah itself, I would say, is a lot more strong than it was in 2006. 30,000 fighters armed with AKs, armed with anti-tank guided missiles. They don't have an air force, but they play to their strengths. So they've had 10 years to dig in deep. And I've read some of the reports from the IDF troops that went into Lebanon during 2006, and they were blown away. They were surprised because their intelligence thought that they were running into guys that are just in sandals. But what they came across was hydraulic steel doors protecting these bunkers that have all 100,000 rockets, let's say. And so how did they do this? All the money is coming from Iran and getting shipped through Syria from Iran. So they're getting all of these weapons, supplies, and training from Iran. And so there's one big thing to consider here, I think, the reason, I think part of the reason why Hezbollah is holding off on launching an attack on Israel or striking more than they already are is because those 100,000 rockets that Hezbollah has in southern Lebanon pointed at Israel, that's kind of like a deterrent against Israel. We believe has nuclear weapons. So Iran uses the rockets that Hezbollah has as a kind of leverage against Israel because Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, but they could tell Hezbollah to fire off those rockets and to launch a ground assault into Israel. So part of what we're seeing is people have leveraging their bets, trying to not overextend themselves. And if they fire off all these rockets, then they no longer have that deterrent.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, it's well, if we think about this in the context of when the Israelis were instigating their operations into Gaza, I mean, there was quite a lot of, should we call them initial raids or sort of trying to gauge the situation. But the circumstances within Hezbollah is way different. I, for one, am not surprised. Well, we were all surprised by the pager sabotages. I mean, I don't think anyone has ever seen an operation like that before. I think we touched upon that last week, right? It's insane. But all of this points to, as you said, they are laying the groundwork for a potential ground operation. And the command of the IDF or some very senior staff within the IDF, I can't remember exactly who said it, is, prepare troops, guys, for a potential land assault. So we've got all these things paving the way for this. It's more just how far is Israel going to go? I agree with you. The Litani River seems like a natural buffer, but are they then just going to sit in this new area and do sort of what the Golan Heights is, or are they going to just try to actually go full way and incapacitate or severely cripple Hezbollah to the point like they have tried to do with Hamas, but that has proven also to be quite tricky. So different strategic objectives here. And I want to bring in a question from Jack, actually, because I think it plays in quite nicely. But how would the real Lebanese, in your opinion, Chris, react to an Israeli ground invasion? I don't think they'll join Hezbollah. Lebanon doesn't want Hezbollah, but at the same time, I don't think there is a Lebanese army, really, at least one that's that functional. What's your take?
Yeah, the Lebanese army would not engage the IDF because they're fully supported and backed by the United States military. I think they would stay out of it, just like how the UN peacekeepers do everything they can to stay out of it. They would probably even evacuate some areas if they thought that there was any chance of them getting entangled into it. And to your question about how far they would go, I would be very surprised if they went past the river. I mean, we're talking about would they go to Beirut? I really do not think that, like they did in the 80s. I strongly doubt it.
But do you think, though, that the Israelis are? I don't know. For me, it seems like we've reached a point where the strikes are happening at a more intense rate. But how long does this go on for logistically before they then do begin to think about ground operations, by the beginning of next month?
So then I do think that they do, if they do go and if they are successfully able to go up to the river and push Hezbollah back, then I do think they stay there. And I think they stay there for a long time, if that's the case. I'm not certain, but I would guess. I mean, that's what the situation was before. I'm going to get the years wrong, but I think that they withdrew from southern Lebanon in like 2001. You could look that up. But, before 2001 or whenever it was, Israel occupied that whole area of southern Lebanon. That they took control of it. And for, I think it was 20 years, because what happened, in the 80s, Israel did go all the way up to Beirut, and then they withdrew back to southern Lebanon, where they were in control up to the river. And for years, basically what happened was there were militias attacking Israel, and it's kind of how Hezbollah came to power, gained more strength, was during that time that Israel was occupying southern Lebanon. Hezbollah was attacking them, and it wasn't until like 2001 when they withdrew. So, and they only withdrew after they felt comfortable that they had some guarantees that this would be a demilitarized zone, but it ended up not being that. So I mean, it's anyone's guess.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring up another map actually. And yeah, guys, for some of you, like it's quite early. Yes, it is quite early, but I'm in London, so it's like what almost 3:30 for me. So having to balance East Coast, West Coast, and European time zones. But I wanted to show this map because I think it's really interesting. This is the United Nations interim or UNIFIL mission in Lebanon. And so this is the area that they are currently. So all these different nations are obviously providers of different peacekeeping entities, and it goes up to if I zoom in here, it's a bit blurry, I know, but that is the Litani River. So this goes up to the Litani River, as a sort of natural buffer, as a natural border.
I can't see
right?
you.
Any
Are you?
thoughts?
I think you're supposed to be. Are you? You're not sharing
Am I
it. I
not
don't think.
showing it? Oh, sorry, guys. I thought I was showing it. So I'm very good at
Here we go.
Riverside StreamYard, as you can tell.
Cool.
Yeah. So this is the area. So all these different nations are countries that are providing some form of peacekeeping entity. And if you zoom in here, that is the Litani River there. So this does go up to what, the first a fifth of Lebanon's territory. Okay, you've got the bigger entity down there. So it's quite a significant chunk of the UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. Chris, I don't know what you make of that.
That's really cool to see. Wow, you're gonna have to share this with me because I haven't seen this before. But it's really interesting to see where all the different units are. You could see the United States kind of has the biggest chunk, it looks like, in the middle. And
That's Malaysia.
oh,
That's not
sorry,
the US.
Malaysia.
That's Malaysia.
I don't even see
Yeah,
the
look
United
at
States there. I thought
unless
they were one.
You've got a sun. You've replaced your Star Spangled Banner with a moony one.
I don't even see US there. I thought that they were part of the mission. I guess maybe it's French led.
Yeah, I think
But
it's
yeah,
French
you
and
always
probably
hear you'll hear people complain about how the UN is useless because they had one job, to prevent war.
I think that the UNIFIL mission is severely underfunded and, to be honest, hasn't really been used for anything other than a bit of a administrative case for what, the best part of 20, 30 years. So, and given the direction of domestic issues in the US and other countries, I think, austerity and therefore defunding, or at least reduced flows towards the UN, probably only going to get worse, not more. But yeah, they are supposed to be doing something about that, aren't they?
So
It's
something
a
I'd like to
pretty
say is that
lackluster group, to be honest, in there.
what the reason this is
Yeah,
kind
go
of
ahead.
the reason this is going to happen, I think, or at least it's heading towards that direction, is because there's 100,000 people in Lebanon that can't go to their homes for the past year, and there's about 60,000 people in Israel who still cannot go to their homes. So just imagine being kicked out of your house tomorrow, and then you can't go back for a year. Like you even might be wanting a war. You might want something to change this so you can go back home. So I think there's a lot of people who want this to happen, and I think that's the big motivating factor behind why it might happen, is because until something changes here, people can't go home. And
But
also,
like, what's
here's the
the
big thing
long?
is if people can't go home and they can't feel safe where they are, then there's also a problem with foreign investment. Like trying to get people to invest into your country, to invest in your business becomes more difficult when there's these tremendous security concerns.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's I mean, Lebanon is a failed state. I think we shouldn't shy away from having to say that. Unfortunately, it's been in a tough place for several years, but ever since 2020 and that horrendous explosion of the facility, I can't remember exactly what it was, the factory within Beirut itself, right? The country has never been able to recover from that because it was also during COVID, so it was all compounded and the whole thing got worse. But now, they don't have a military that they can really leverage. Hezbollah is so, I think, intertwined with the political as well as military structures that it leaves the Lebanese people really at little option, with poor odds. So, what do you think is going to happen in the next, I don't know, short term, no, a few weeks? Are we going to see a full scale war, or is this all still just a bit of posturing? I personally think it's going to happen, but to what extent is difficult to say.
Personally, I think it's going to happen. It's anyone's guess, and there are things that could certainly delay it further. The United States is diplomatically, they're working very hard to try to delay it or to stop it. So there are factors that could change what we're seeing right now. But I think the things to look for is just if you're following this closely, I would try to find as much information on troop movements for Israel in terms of what number of troops they have on the border and how much equipment they're moving there. We've heard reports for the past year that they've been moving more and more soldiers there slowly. So once they have all those pieces in place, then because I think that's what they need to do. They're preparing. They basically have been withdrawing more soldiers from Gaza so that they could go and move them to the north with to fight against Hezbollah.
So another thing that's obviously coming to mind is if they were to squat, as in the Israelis would squat in southern Lebanon, what's your take on their ability to sustain that front, just to hold that area and not to be, I don't know, receive or be on the receiving end of strikes or disruptive, I don't know, maybe if you want to call them guerrilla style tactics or something from Syria, from other parts of Lebanon where Hezbollah have had to relocate, right? This is not just going to be a simple case of once they're in southern Lebanon and they're just going to sit there and it's all honky-dory. They're going to have to continually put up with raids and so on. And so they're going to need a sizable amount of manpower to facilitate that, right?
They're going to fight probably an insurgency war. They're going to probably have a coin mission, as it's called, counterinsurgency, for the next probably at least decade until they decide to withdraw again. It would be, if we're looking at history and how things go, they faced numerous bombings. They faced a lot of their soldiers were getting killed during the last time that they occupied southern Lebanon, and it was a big reason why there was a contingent in Israel that was calling for the withdrawal back to the UN border guideline because they were getting killed there. There was attacks. So they'll fight a counterinsurgency fight, and it'll be difficult, I think. But I think they'll hold the territory if that's what they want. Coin operations. I mean, that's what I did when I was deployed to Iraq, and it's a pain because you have to, I mean, there are lessons they could learn. Maybe they could try to stand up their own militia force, like how we did in Iraq, where we tried to stand up the Sons of Iraq, and we paid a lot of money basically to insurgent groups to prevent them from attacking. But what worked in Iraq doesn't necessarily going to work in Lebanon.
Yeah, I just wanted to share another one, actually. I'm glad you mentioned coin because it's something that I studied during my conversations at SAIS and studies at SAIS. And there's one particular report which is cool. Or like maybe it's a specific report, but it's like a collective summary written about 10 years ago about various different coin operations in the past, in the post-World War II era. And they look at, what it takes for a counterinsurgency to be successful or not. I'm not going to download it because my computer's being a bit difficult, but it basically, it gives you a pretty cool synopsis and goes through everywhere from, they basically bring out a few different types of criteria and then try to look historically at different examples, be that in, Southeast Asia to parts of Africa to wherever it is, right, or even Latin America. So pretty cool report if you have a sort of interest in the broader coin and just sort of asymmetrical warfare kind of things. Rand is obviously very good for all that sort of stuff. But yeah, anyone who's interested, go ahead.
Can I don't know how to send this to you, but this, I think you'll like this if you haven't read it already. It's is this chat with Studio?
There's a private chat function in. You can chuck it in there. There you go.
So this is the
got it.
U.S. Army counterinsurgency coin manual, field manual. basically the playbook on lessons learned over the last over 2 decades of fighting an insurgency. And if this won't bore you, I'll read you just 2 sentences.
I'm bored right now. Go for it, buddy. That sounds really interesting. No, go for it.
So I was just reading this recently, and I found this very interesting. But right from the United States Counterinsurgency Field Manual, it says, quote, "A government that abuses its people or is tyrannical generates resistance to its rule. People who have been injured, maltreated, victimized, dishonored, or had close friends or relatives killed by the government, particularly by its security forces, may lash back at their attackers." So they're essentially saying if you go in and you occupy a country or an area and you're tyrannical in your rule and you go and you try killing 30 militants a day, what you're going to probably do is you're going to end up creating 50 militants a day if you try to just go in with a bullets approach. And so what they determined was one way to fix this was later in the field manual, it says, by mid-tour, U.S. forces should be working closely with local forces, training or supporting them, and building an indigenous security capability. The natural tendency is to create forces in a U.S. image. This is a mistake. Instead, local indigenous forces need to mirror the enemy's capabilities and seek to supplant the insurgents' role. So one of the keys to ending an insurgency, at least from the United States perspective, is to set up a local force that looks like how the insurgents look, counterintuitively. Yeah. So if anyone gets a chance to check that document out, I mean, it's fascinating because the U.S. we get a lot of the U.S. military catches a lot of flack for like not achieving our political goals, but we did get the insurgencies in Iraq and in Afghanistan somewhat under control by the time we left. Of course, as insurgencies do, they come back after you leave. But I don't know. There's some lessons learned in there, I think.
Yeah, one of my professors at SAIS, Johns Hopkins SAIS, when I was studying, was Seth Jones. I think he's the head of the security program now. And he led the course that I took on insurgency and counterinsurgency, which was really interesting. But yeah, he runs the program now at CSIS, which is the Center for Strategic and International Studies, arguably the most prestigious, academic institute of its kind, specifically towards like warfare and that sort of stuff. Yeah, he was the director of he's the director of the International Security Program. Pretty interesting guy. I recommend people, if you're interested, to check out his work. I'll just bring up his profile, actually. I'm trying to get better at this whole sharing thing. But yeah, I remember we did a course on that with him. And he was really interesting to sort of see his perspectives about it. Like, I think this is his Twitter, if it's still loading. But yeah, it was a very good course. And one of the things he also I learned a lot from was this. Is it this one? My navigation of my internet is not very good today. Either that or my whole it's just laggy as hell, isn't it? Yeah, so sorry about that, everyone. But yeah, it's how do I change tabs? Oh, never mind. It's too complicated. It's not working. Is it that one? Yeah, it's this one. So this one is pretty cool. I don't know. You can see this, right? Or can you only see X? Not yet. Share this tab instead. Okay, cool. Thanks, StreamYard. Yes. So this is a guide to analysis of insurgency. And one of the things that I always thought was really interesting.
And if it's still not up yet, can you pull it up? Like have it show on the stream? I'm gonna close this door real fast.
Yeah, sorry. It's Yeah, go for it, man. Why are you being such a pain? Sorry, everyone. StreamYard seems to be incredibly annoying today. But look at this. Look at this house that our man Chris has moved into. What a place, right?
Right.
This one. Yeah, got a grand piano and everything. It's this one.
There we go. Yeah.
So this one. So one of the things I thought was really interesting was the types of insurgency, and specifically to do with like whether or not it's people centric or like yeah, you've got different types of insurgency and how they go around. But yeah, stuff like this, the four broad categories of as an insurgency, and therefore the relative ways. I think this builds on the document you were sharing. To be fair, and basically, therefore, the way that you then have to approach to deal with the types of insurgency, which I think was pretty cool.
Can you
Military
share that with
factors,
me?
non-military.
I'd be
Yeah,
curious
I will send this to you.
to read
Yeah, this
that.
is what I was looking for. This is what I was looking for. So you have the overall strategy, the political performance and capabilities, and then it's broken down into obviously things like history, geography, the social economics and political processes, and that's the setting. And then you've got the overall assessment, which is the population and territory controlled by each side. So in this case, the number of people that Hezbollah is governing over in the east and the south, the political and military performance of them in the government of Lebanon, and whether and how legitimized they are as the insurgent force, right? Whether or not you have what was the terms? It's people centric is the one that I can remember, but that's basically sort of to deal with an insurgency. Maybe you can better say it than me, Chris. Is people centric? You're trying to bring people around to rejecting the insurgency group, a bit like the Americans tried with the Afghan people in the Afghan war, right? Versus enemy centric, which is your approach is to just simply deal with the enemy itself and forget about the people and simply just focus going hard and fast at the insurgency entity itself, which I feel is more what Israel is probably going to do, right? I don't think they care too much about engaging the Lebanese because, well, 700 people have died. I don't know. Any thoughts on this? It's a bit, sorry, it would have been a bit more coherent, but the screen was a bit laggy.
No, it's interesting that there's no like one size fit all solution for an insurgency. And like you said, you have to look at the cultural and historical backdrop. Like the United States might be able to set up a local force because they have a very different relationship, historical relationship with Iraq than Lebanon does. I mean, than Israel does. Israel might not ever be able to do something like that, just because of the way those two countries kind of some parts of them hate each other, in to the core. I was recently looking at the insurgency that a lot of people don't look at often is the one that happened in the Sinai Peninsula with Egypt, that Egypt fought for over 10 years and just recently announced that they had won basically the insurgency. And it was, I think, what you're
Oh
talking
wow,
about in
okay.
terms of the people centric, where they basically it was the ethnic Bedouin tribes that were kind of co-opted by ISIS groups. And and it's interesting because it kind of mirrors what's happening in southern Lebanon because so after the 6-day war and the peace treaty there in with Egypt and Israel, there was the preconditions of that peace treaty was that both sides couldn't have security or military forces near the border. So what happened was a lot of lawlessness kind of broke out. And then 10, 20 years later, both Egypt and Israel are having to deal with insurgencies and criminal elements and poverty in this border region between them. And that includes the city of Rafah, which has been a nightmare for both sides. And so how Egypt kind of accomplished some of their goals was by setting up a working with the local Bedouin tribes, paying them and working with them against extremist elements and against groups like ISIS. And between 2011 and 2023, they finally had some success. But it's interesting how when I think the thing that stuck out to me as kind of a lesson was that when these countries fight, whether it's Lebanon versus Israel or Israel and Egypt, and then there's this border region that is kind of demilitarized, it also becomes delawed. It becomes this kind of Wild West. And then
Okay,
what
yeah.
fills that vacuum? Hezbollah, ISIS, so it's kind of it's kind of a sad story
Yeah.
that it happens that way.
No, it becomes archaic. You get pockets of stability and pockets of anarchy as well. But you made me think of another article, or it's behind a paywall because it's Taylor and Francis, which I'll share though quickly, which is that we're talking about the notion of, so we're talking sort of people who are joined or will be listening later on. We're talking about sort of the theory of armed conflict and specifically insurgency and the ways to deal with insurgency, which is one, you can have population centric, which means that you engage the population to rise up and to help you deal with the insurgency themselves, or you've got enemy centric, which is where you primarily go act all out on the enemy and don't really bother. There are other ones, and one of them was this article here, written by a few people in 2016, because it came in the light of Syria and obviously what was going on in between there and Iraq and obviously ISIS. And then when Russia joined, the whole thing became a bit of a mess. And they basically were arguing that there's more to it than simply just population and enemy. And I can't remember the other couple that they emphasized. As I say, I can't go into it because it's behind a paywall, and we all love paywalls. But yeah, it's a fascinating area, to be honest with you. This sort of subset of military studies, of war studies, and how it could go. But I think, yeah. So I don't know. Any thoughts before maybe we pivot to a slightly different topic? Anything else you want to emphasize?
When it comes to coin
in the context of Israel and Hezbollah, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think you're on the money in terms of like Israel's going to go in and they're going to try to flatten to the river. They're going to try to destroy Hezbollah in detail, which is kind of another option that I guess the closest analogy would be ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, where the United States and a coalition went in and just basically tried to flatten that. There was no like, hey, they worked with rebel groups in conjunction, but it was kind of like, let's destroy this in detail. Let's leave no ISIS element standing. And that approach seemed to work in terms of pushing back their territorial gains. So yeah, there is that kind of different approaches for different situations. And in Lebanon, I'm trying to think of how else you might apply like a coin filter to that. It's an interesting angle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I look at it primarily as an insurgency operation necessarily, because Hezbollah is the most established non-state actor. I mean, as we've said before, they're more kitted out than certain members even of NATO. It's insane, to be honest, how many that their troops that they have and missiles
the first
and so on.
phase,
They're very lopsided in terms of not having a very diverse. Okay.
I was going to say the first phase of the war would look more, I think, like a conventional battle, but then it becomes more of a coin discussion. I think if Israel does occupy, then it becomes more of that kind of fight. And yeah, I've seen some pretty gnarly Hezbollah like their promotional videos, and I gotta say, Hezbollah is leagues ahead of some other adversarial countries when it comes to promotional videos. They've got some just very spicy videos that make it they look like Western SF.
Yes, that is that. I like that analogy. But yeah, I see someone asked, John was very impressed, Chris, by your new home. But he's actually found out that he sees the green glow around you, and I don't think the weed is causing the glow. So Chris is just lying to all viewers. He's not really where he is. He's not who he says he is.
Dude, I live in my dad's basement. So
oh, it's your dad's basement. Oh, okay. I live in my mum's basement most of the time. Well, my mum's attic. Sorry. I prefer to be elevated above. Better air. It's a bit more airy. Better ventilation. Okay. So yeah, I think we'll obviously come back together, I guess, in the next few days or something. Well, assuming you want to talk about this further. And I think we're both covering it in our own ways, respectively, on our own channels. But Oh, John, your dad lives in your basement as well. Okay, oh, that's good. So yeah, I was just going to share. So the other thing we wanted to talk about was this, which is that I made a video on it yesterday. I think you've got a video coming out in the next few days about this secret
probably next
Russian facility
week.
factory. Okay,
Yeah,
and
probably
it
in the
was in
next week.
drones basically, and yeah, obviously this is my plug to say everyone subscribe if you haven't. Look at all this content you're missing out on, right? How good are these thumbnails? Anyway, but yeah, I did a brief synopsis of it. Basically, it was an exclusive report in Reuters, and they were talking about the fact that the Russians have seemingly produced these G3 or Garpia, if I'm saying that right, drones with the assistance not just of China's land and facilities, but with actually Chinese technical input, which, if that is the case, would mean a seismic shift in that China is no longer not just passively standing by, and they're no longer just providing non-lethal aid. They are actively helping to fuel Putin's war machine. Chris, I mean, from what you've seen, how do you feel about these developments?
So I was looking at it, and I think there's two different ways to look at it. One is, so it depends how you feel, I guess, about China. So I'm looking at the report, and one of the things to note, like if you just read the headline, you might think that China is supporting Russia's war effort, and that might be true, but it also might be true that there are companies inside China that are looking to make a dime, and that the Chinese government had no idea that this was happening. And I think that is specifically highlighted in the Reuters report. I'm the last person to glaze for the Chinese government in the PRC, but I think we do have to, think that there might be a chance that China legitimately didn't know what was happening. And so they even specifically said that there's no evidence that China does know. So if they had that evidence, they would certainly publish it. I would probably err on the side of like, this is greedy companies in China that are trying to make a dollar by making these drones that can fight against Ukraine for Russia. But I could also see the Chinese government looking the other way. We're going to have to wait for more evidence. There's certainly a trend here that China is laying down a lot of material, a lot of support for Russia's war effort. And they, meanwhile, diplomatically are trying to sound like they're this neutral party. I don't think they're neutral. But I also wouldn't go as far as to say like the Chinese government is manufacturing a drone or facilitating it. So what we really want to see after this, though, is the Chinese government make a concerted effort to clamp down on this, especially if they're going to align with what they're publicly saying. Then they want to be neutral. Then we should see some strong steps taken to stop this from happening in the future.
Oh, that's strongly on that last point. Yes, very much. No, I mean, that's a fair point. I didn't really think of the distinction between the government and perhaps some opportunistic businesses that are trying to leverage this for their own gain. It's a good point. I mean, President Xi has said that he had no idea, or the CCP has made it sound like they have no idea that this is going on. I find that hard to believe. I personally am very, I hate the CCP. I don't think there's anything no quibbles around that. But, I do wonder, well, China's benevolently neutral, let's be honest. It's like what the US was in the Second World War with the British, really. And I think the Chinese have been supporting the Russians in enough ways that I think it's, whether or not it's non-lethal aid, it's still significant for the Russians to be able to utilize, that money that they get from the Chinese, they then use to buy a bunch of drones from the Iranians, for example, or whatever, you know what I mean? Or they buy a bunch of stuff from the North Koreans. It's all, I mean, this autocratic axis is, they're all paying each other and the money's just going back and right. And it's, I think for the Chinese, again, it comes down to largely trying to make use of Russia's advanced technological know-how in the run up to a potential operation campaign, whatever it is, with Taiwan. There are some comparative advantages the Russians still have over the Chinese. State coffers.
How do you mean? Like in terms of what advantages does Russia bring to China?
Well, Russia has certain military knowledge, and as I said, expertise of advanced technological systems that the Chinese don't. They
Like with some
also are
missile stuff?
developing missiles, but also the submarine systems.
Okay.
China's submarine warfare, or they have an Achilles heel in their submarine classes. I'm not saying the Russians are out. If you look at the statistics of how many the Russians have versus the whole of NATO, for example, it's obviously very lopsided. But yeah, there are certain areas that the Chinese still lack when it comes to maritime capabilities. There was a great report also done by CSIS about 2.5 years ago, which I went to an event in their summer sessions, which was talking about the fishing boats and the use that the Chinese have. I'm sure you've heard about this, Chris. Of they
Yeah.
leverage sort of fishing boats and what you call the dark fleet as a way to
The
sort
third
of
Navy force.
Yeah, to project power, and they've been doing this off the coast of Chile for many years. They do it around some of the other South Pacific, islands as well, and it's part of the reason they've gained quite a lot of support with the Solomon Islands. They signed that defense pact last summer, and essentially the defense systems are these sorts of rather odd fishing vessels, but that are quite well kitted out from the analysis that CSIS and others have seen. So the point I'm making is that the Chinese know that they need to, I think, make up for this, and the Russians' knowledge in that area, I think, comes in. But that's from what I understand, looking into this from yesterday.
Yep, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. But yeah, so you don't think that, I don't know, what's anything else on this point? Is it going to
So I can
mean
totally understand why.
sanctions?
I can understand and be sympathetic for why you would be skeptical that the Chinese government doesn't know about this, because pretty much every company in the PRC is like majority controlled by the Chinese government, right? So it's easy for us to think, hey, how do they not know? Everything here is kind of government run. But I do think in this case, there's a lot that can go on that a government doesn't know about, especially if one is like corrupt and incompetent. So that's just my read on it, but we'll certainly know more soon. Like if this keeps happening or if it escalates, then that's a good indicator that the Chinese government does know, and worse, they don't care and they're not going to stop it. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worry for the Chinese, and I'm seeing some people who are confused here. There is no guest speaker. We're having a conversation between the two of us. I mean, I'm mainly asking Chris questions because I think he knows more on the military details than I do. I'll chime in with some geopolitical strategy points occasionally, but it's a joint conversation, and you guys are chiming in and adding comments, and we pick them out. So I saw a few people being like, who is this guy, or what's going on here? So that's the purpose of this conversation. Chris is nice enough to jump on occasionally and talk to me about stuff. But yeah, so no, I agree with you largely in what you said. I think that the Chinese don't want to be at risk of secondary sanctions, which I think the Americans have also not really wanted to do. But if they,
that
I think if the US gets to the point where they're like,
that would be bad news.
There's a terrible lag on this stream. I don't know why. Sorry.
Yeah, that'd be bad news if it went in that direction. If we start seeing the United States sanction China.
Oh, well, I don't think they're going to. No, I don't think they're going to do that. I really don't. I just don't think that the Americans have that tenacity to do it. I think that the Americans don't want to risk sanctioning anyone that requires such strategic consideration, like the Chinese, the Indians, right? The Indians are buying oil and, well, even military stuff off the Russians at discounted prices. The Chinese, but the Americans need India for China's counterbalancing. So they're not going to sanction them. And China's too integral to the US's own economic interests that they're not going to sanction them. Look how quickly the US moved when the Houthis were really bigging up the disruptions in the Gulf of Aden, right? The Americans have the capacity to move and make waves pun intended, on the oceans and stuff when they want to. So yeah, I don't know.
And
I don't think so.
yeah, and I think India is also sending artillery to the Ukrainian military. So truly doing some counterbalancing.
India is hedging. Turkey is hedging. They love their hedges. So is Hungary. So is Serbia. There's so
And
many hedging
it can be
countries.
frustrating to see that. It can be frustrating, especially if you have a dog in the war. If you have like a strong sentiment about who you would like to win, it's very frustrating to see that. But if you take a more, I think, like global perspective or just what might be good for avoiding World War III, I mean, there's an argument to be made that that kind of hedging is part of what prevents escalation. But I guess that would be a whole different conversation on escalation. Yeah, I like to
no,
see
I
it.
think so. Some people writing in the comments here about sort of the West's hypocrisy and that, you know, if the PRC cannot intervene, but it's okay for others to intervene. This is not a defense of Western interventionism in the past, right? Again, I think we want to make that very clear. The weaponization of the dollar has been one of the biggest mistakes, I think, by the US, or the over weaponization of the dollar, at least, to the point where it's now pushing countries like BRICS Plus to try and, well, get off it. Whether or not that's tangibly possible is another matter.
I would
Go
also
on, Chris.
argue that not all intervention is equal. Like, if you're intervening to help a state defend itself against being invaded, it's different than intervening to help a country invade another country. It's just different. Not to say that, yeah, there isn't some hypocrisy, but I don't think you can like make it equal. You know, helping Iraq defend itself against a US invasion would be different than helping the United States invade Iraq. So I don't know. I think it's not exactly the slam dunk that people. I always see that comment. I see that comment all the time. Like, why is it okay for the United States to intervene, but not any other country? Well, it's fundamentally a different war for
Yeah.
both sides.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that what is it? Everyone, I don't know. Afghanistan's the best example because everyone's like, well, you know, the Afghan war was then the Taliban, but the CIA helped create the Taliban and Mujahideen to fight off the Soviets. Yeah, but the Soviets were the first initial entity that invaded Afghanistan for their own self-interest as well. So, like, it's a non-stop. How far do you want to keep going back before everyone's done bad shit? And two wrongs don't make a right. I find becoming increasingly relevant. Well, it's like sort of, well, Russia's invading Ukraine. Well, America invaded Iraq. Well, both are wrong, guys. Like, we can still say that what Russia's doing in Ukraine is wrong. It's not a defense of America's actions in Iraq.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Personally, the most, I guess, charitable argument I could make for Russia's invasion is that there seems to be good evidence that the CIA was helping the Ukrainian intelligence organizations before the full-scale invasion in 2022. The American CIA was helping the Ukrainian intelligence with pulling off attacks against Russian operatives and helping them fight the Russian military. But you could also argue that they were doing that to help Ukraine defend itself against what was happening in various parts of southern Ukraine. So where Russia was full on supporting the separatist movements in Ukraine. So, you know, yeah, like you said, it could be litigated all the way back to the Stone Age.
Yeah, I don't want to go too much further down there. Scott Stokes is I think really far up the Putin pipeline. The sun's definitely not shining wherever his head is. So so I don't know how to say that without getting cancelled on the internet or something. Anyway, I think the last thing I wanted to chat with you about was about the obviously Putin's nuclear threats again. From your perspective, like, what do you think? I mean, he says this a lot. I do think the red lines are being pushed quite a lot, but yeah, what's your take on what's been happening again on the Ukrainian front and Putin's latest comments after Zelensky's comments in the UN yesterday or Tuesday?
Yeah,
No, Wednesday.
what I've been seeing is Zelensky is going around to all of his allies, and he's kind of laying down this like victory plan. And I think a key part of his victory plan, if I had to guess, is he's asking for permission to use Western long range weapons inside of Russia. Because I think if he wants, it's becoming a little bit more clear what's happening in Kursk, and it appears like the Russian counteroffensive in Kursk is gaining a lot of ground. They've retaken something like 30-40% of the territory that Ukraine originally gained. So it's down to like 900 kilometers of land in Kursk. And I think Zelensky's victory plan is kind of reliant on holding on to that territory. And holding on to that territory would be a lot easier if they could use long range missiles that American, ATACMS inside Russia. So I think part of his victory plan is that, and also he wants additional material weapons, more of the same. But I think the key here is that Putin is trying to signal, if you allow that, we're changing our nuclear. This is what I've read, is that Putin is signaling that they're changing the threshold for when they would use nukes, and I think he's kind of teasing that the threshold would be lowered if we use ATACMS, if we allow the use of ATACMS inside Russian territory, because basically, I think from Putin's point of view, he really needs to retake Kursk, and not only retake Kursk, but create a buffer zone inside of Ukraine to continue going a little bit further in the Sumy region. So, yeah, do I think he would actually use nuclear weapons? No, I don't, but I could be wrong, and it would suck to be wrong about that. Personally, I think I think Ukraine feels they need to hold on to that territory as a bargaining chip, because I think that, they appear to be signaling that the war could see an end in 2025, or at least a ceasefire. What do you think? What do you think of that?
No, I mean that's really interesting. I was also grinning at one point because I saw Matt Hemming's comment about I need a moderator, and I was like, and then Scott Stokes. Sorry for everyone joining. There was this troll guy. I just got rid of him. It was a bit boring after a while. But then Matt wrote this, which was just really funny to me. Have you got no idea what funny? So thanks, Matt. Appreciate you, bro. So it's just really funny. I'm not laughing at the situation, and maybe it was a bit ill timing on my part, but yeah, that's funny. No, I think that it's really difficult, Chris, to be honest with you, because for the time that I've studied Russian policy and stuff, when was the last time Putin made a serious nuclear mention? It was September 22, when they activated the partial, i.e. full mobilization of the 500,000, which has since, received a lot of backlash from Russians, and generally why Putin hasn't done it again. But, I do think that this time is a bit different, for sure. We're not just talking about the Ukrainians doing a bunch of stuff within Ukraine. It's 2 strategic military sites in Russia. And Putin has been, I think, surprisingly mute or unconcerned about it. Sure, Kursk is not the most integral part of the Russian territory, and the territory that they've taken is not, going to make or break Russia, at least in the short term. But, the more opportunistic, or the more zealous, if that's the right word, the Ukrainians get in terms of trying to tip the balance of power or whatever by using long range missiles, that is something that the Kremlin can't just blatantly ignore. So I'm sort of leaning towards that there is a bit of truth to that, and also because he's not threatening to use the weapons, he's threatening to change the way that they approach nuclear doctrine, which up until now has been largely, I think, aligned between the US and Russia, generally speaking. So to make such a significant shift means that he is actually beginning to think about the steps needed to make a launch possible. You don't just go and press a button. The Soviet or Russian approach to nuclear weapons is in some ways more complicated than the Americans, at least from what I understand. So by signaling that he's really thinking about readjusting this format is a sort of, a concentrated effort, a very big telegraphing that, like, hey guys, we're not actually going to do it, but we are making it easier to do, i.e. and we're making all those aforementioned steps to get there. So yeah, it's definitely disconcerting. I have my reservations really about what the use of long-range missiles and such within Russia would really do to help Ukraine win outright on the battlefield. I'm not sure how that would enable them to regain, because at the end of the day, what do they want? They don't want to control Kursk. They want to regain the territory that the Russians control. But by striking long-range missiles, sure, you remove the artillery fire and the destruction across the country, but does that mean that galvanizes your forces, streamlines your forces to be able to then go across and retake the troops? How many defensive lines have the Russians put in? Dragon's Teeth, all this sort of stuff. They're very well embedded now. So I'm a bit skeptical about really I think the last point I make, and then I would love your thoughts before we probably wrap up for this session, because I know we're not trying to do like multi-hour length sessions. I think Zelensky's trying to be as ambitious as he can before the potential of the election and the reality of a Trump administration. So if he can actually begin to use long-range missiles before Trump comes in and says, no, you can't do that anymore, then at least he's achieved some partial strategic military objectives. Because if he doesn't, and then Trump comes in, then he owns a bit of Kursk and nothing else. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but I think he's trying to act as quickly as possible.
I think regardless of whether I think people, there is an important factor there about whether what level of U.S. support will continue, whether it's Harris or Trump. I've always said, and I think Zelensky believes this as well, that it's not going to make that big of a difference whether Trump's elected or Harris is elected. He said in an interview with the New Yorker just a day or two ago, he said that Trump says a lot of things for his political audience, for political purposes, like how any politician does, and that if he actually got into office again, I think we wouldn't see a major change. I think there would be a push to end the war, but I think Harris also wants to end the war. It's not as though the Democrats don't want the war over. I think most people want the war over. It's just about how it ends. And ultimately, Zelensky was saying that it's about if he's able to end the war from a position of strength, or if they end the war from basically really, really bad situation where they don't have any security guarantees and they're not able to negotiate any return of their land. So I think, because both sides are running up, from what I've seen in all estimates, is that there's a lot of war fatigue. People, they can't go on forever. There is a limit to how far both sides are willing to go. So I think there's some signaling that, Zelensky believes the only way Russia right now will end the war is if there's some kind of punitive measure, like the operation in Kursk, or basically turning the screws harder on his forces. But yeah, I don't know. All these things, sometimes it's like it's going to take time for us to find out ultimately.
It is. And for those of you wondering why I've got a foghorn, there are some absolute wankers doing some construction around my house. Sorry, I'm very pissed off. And once I get off this stream, I'll be going at the people who are in charge of that construction very hard, because it's been a week and they will not, it's unrelenting. Sorry. As you can probably tell, I'm a little bit pissed off about it, but that's why you can hear such a bloody noise. But Chris, I mean, anything else? Where should we go from here? I don't know. Anything else? Do you want to just keep talking so that I don't have to have people listening to us?
Sure. I do have to. It's perfect timing anyway because I do have to go. But I will say, I have a. If I'm reading the vibes and looking at the tea leaves, I feel like we're at a crossroads right now at both the conflicts in the Middle East and the conflicts in Europe, and it's an inflection point where I could see it going one of two or several ways, but one way is that the war in Ukraine and Russia escalates and becomes more dangerous and draws in more foreign forces like the Baltic states, and then also things could get worse in the Middle East if the ground invasion actually happens in southern Lebanon, and we start heading towards World War III. Or I could see it going the other way, and in 2025, a peace agreement is met, and in 2025, United States and its partners are able to prevent a ground invasion into Lebanon. So, that's what I'm hoping for. But yeah, that's all I've got.
No, thanks, Chris and Brandon. Don't worry. I'm not mad. I'm seething with infuriation at this. No, it's. I know it's not that bad for you guys, but I've been living with it for the past 2 weeks, and it's extremely. I live in a mews here in London, so the acoustics are very small, and they're on the other side of this wall. And it's like I feel like they're going to drill through into my home. But some of you saying it sounds like a war zone. Yeah, I get that sentiment. I wish I was in Chris's new house with his fancy piano. No, thank you very much, Chris. It's been great, guys. If you enjoyed the chat, then I know, give it a thumbs up or something. We hope to do more of this on periodically. I really hope that there's drawdown, and I'm just scared. I just don't think the Israelis, the Netanyahu government, are going to acknowledge or even adhere to the ceasefire calls. They're intent on going in. They're intent on delivering a decisive blow to one of their biggest threats and also the biggest non-state actor in the world. So I think we should definitely keep that in mind. The Russians, I mean, there's so much going on at the moment. We've got a live stream tomorrow. We mentioned the UN. I've got a live stream with that tomorrow with James Lindsay, and then we've got another one on Sunday, I think, about something else. So quite a few different things. But Chris, it's always a pleasure to have you on. It's nice to, I think, find like-minded people on YouTube and chat about things that you're passionate about and stuff. So it's been a real pleasure as always. And everyone, thanks for watching. Yeah, guys, if you want to follow me, you can find me on the Global Gambit or Piotr, my first name. Yeah, I'll write a comment somewhere in Chris's channel if he's okay with that. And you can. But
totally.
Anyway, thanks a lot, guys, and check out Chris's channel as well, obviously. And we'll speak to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Take care.